Let's talk about the men's rights movement. You've probably heard of it, and depending on who you ask, it's either a vital civil rights cause or a dangerous backlash against feminism. So, what's the real story? Today, we're going to dig into the heart of this incredibly polarizing debate.
And really, this question gets to the core of it all. This isn't just a minor disagreement. We're looking at two completely different ways of seeing the world, a real clash of worldviews. We're going to break down how both sides frame their arguments, what theories they use, and what data they point to.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at how the movement is seen from the inside versus the outside. Then we'll get into the main academic critique, this thing called the Backlash Theory. After that, we'll dive into the counterarguments and the data the MRM uses to back them up. And finally, we'll ask that big question. Is there any path forward here? Okay, so let's set the stage. To understand the debate, you first have to understand the starting positions of everyone involved. So, if you ask the movement itself what it's all about, this is what you'll hear. They define themselves as a civil rights movement, plain and simple. Their whole mission, as they see it, is to highlight and fix systemic problems and inequalities that specifically hurt men and boys. And what kind of issues are we talking about? Well, they're pointing to some pretty serious stuff. Things like the devastatingly high suicide rates among men, the fact that boys are falling further and further behind in school, and what they see as a deep-seated bias against fathers in family court. For them, these are urgent, real-world crises. But when you turn to the academic world, the picture you get is, well, completely different. A recent analysis found that scholars often portray men's groups in three main ways: as dangerous, as just plain wrong and deluded, or as being driven by nothing more than emotional reactivity. It's a pretty stark contrast. Now, that very negative academic view doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's actually grounded in a pretty specific and influential theory. Let's break that down. At the heart of most academic critiques is this idea called the Backlash Theory. The theory goes like this. The men's rights movement isn't really a proactive fight for anything. Instead, it's a reaction against feminism. The argument is that feminist progress created a crisis of masculinity for some men, and this movement is their way of pushing back. And this quote from the scholar Jonathan A. Allen really sums up that viewpoint perfectly. From this perspective, the MRM's entire identity is basically defined by its opposition to feminism, not by its own goals. Another major point from critics is this idea of conflation. They often place the MRM inside this larger, messier online ecosystem called the manosphere. The concern here is that the MRM can act as a kind of gateway, pulling people towards other groups that hold much more extreme or even hateful views. And here's one more key academic idea from sociologist Emily Carrion. It's called privilege renegotiation. Sounds a bit complex, but the idea is that the MRM offers a way for men to see themselves as victims. This allows them to feel like good, moral people without ever having to grapple with the idea that they might benefit from broader gender inequality. Okay, so we've laid out the academic critique pretty clearly. Now it's time to flip the coin. How does the men's rights movement actually respond to all of this? What's their side of the story? And this right here is where you see the total disconnect. The academic view says the motivation is protecting privilege and reacting against feminism. The MRM view says no, the motivation is addressing real disadvantages, and our goal is to complete the project of human rights, not fight it. They're not even on the same page.
So the central pillar of the MRM's counter-argument is that their critics are making a fundamental error in their thinking, an error they've dubbed the apex fallacy.
So what exactly is the apex fallacy? Well, imagine you judge all men based only on the tiny minority at the very top, the CEOs, the presidents, the billionaires. The MRM argues that's exactly what their critics do. They say it completely ignores the struggles, vulnerabilities, and disadvantages faced by the vast majority of ordinary men. And they use data to try and prove this point. Take, for example, who dies on the job. An incredible 93% of all workplace fatalities are men. These are often in grueling, dangerous jobs that are far from positions of power. Or let's look at the criminal justice system. One major study found that for the very same crime, men receive prison sentences that are, on average, 63% longer than women. For the MRM, this is a clear-cut example of systemic bias. And it's not just about risk. It's also about things like education and opportunity. They point to the growing education gap, where in the US, women are now earning almost 60% of all university degrees. So, putting it all together, the MRM says, look at this data. They argue it shows a proactive concern for real problems that affect not just men, but society as a whole. They insist this isn't about trying to roll back rights for women, it's about making sure everyone gets a fair shake. So that leaves us with the million-dollar question. We have two sides that are worlds apart. Is there any way to bridge this massive divide? Ultimately, this whole debate seems to boil down to one core challenge. On one side, you have academic theories that focus on big-picture power structures and privilege. And on the other, you have empirical data that reflects the lived, on-the-ground experiences of many men. And right now, there's a giant chasm between the two. So we have to end by asking, is common ground even possible? Can the world of data-driven advocacy and the world of academic theory ever find a way to talk to each other instead of past each other? When it comes to men's issues, honestly, the answer to that question could end up shaping the future of gender politics for decades to come.